Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is understanding the colonial economy. So, what you're first going to need to do is get out the worksheet that I gave you in class. The worksheet is called Understanding the Colonial Economy in a Global Context. Okay, first, why did the colonists prosper between 1585 and 1763? This is a large period of time, but I would hope you'd wonder how did and why did they prosper? Gold and silver had not been discovered in colonial America during this period, and there were no spices to trade. England was a major player as a primary source of manufactured goods in world markets. So what that means is that England had plenty of manufactured goods, goods that were made from lumber and metals. A world market means trade between France, between England, the Dutch, Asia, you name it. You might think the English colonies were a failure because they were not finding gold. Answer to the above question that I asked. Colonial America did possess an abundant supply of land and other natural resources. This is why things turned out well for them. However, labor was not plentiful, but we'll get to that later. So remember, what did make colonial America very successful was just the massive supply of land and other natural resources, namely timber. So again, this is what made the colonies successful. Okay, you had land and resources, so what? The colonists faced initial uncertainty about what goods should they produce, how to produce the goods, who should produce the goods, and finally, for whom the goods should be produced. Eventually, however, the colonists did prosper. And again, think about all the goods that were produced in the colonies, which were very creative. By all the products, think about the maps that we've seen in class. When you looked at New England, when you looked at the Middle, again, the various things from whether it be fishing, whaling, lumber, grain, rum, iron, there were many things that the colonists used to be prosperous. These are some economic truths. Economic choices are made because people's wants are unlimited, but resources are scarce. So everybody wants everything. They want the sky. But again, there isn't enough to go around for everybody to meet all their needs, and that makes resources scarce. England had to economically expand because they lacked resources. Again, we came from England, and England created the colonies and utilized the colonies because they wanted to expand. They just didn't have the resources in England. In any economic decision, whether it is an individual, business, or government, there are consequences for the present and future. England, the colonies, and the world would never be the same because of new trade opportunities. This is in the New World. However, not all of this economic success was good. Again, remember slavery and the American Revolution. So, economic success was good for merchants in colonial America, some farmers in colonial America. Again, not the backcountry farmers or anything. The plantation owners were successful. Again, the government in England, business owners in England. But again, slaves would not be a part of this economic prosperity. Okay, this is where we're going to see the worksheet. If you look at number 1, why were colonists considered entrepreneurs? Okay, and an entrepreneur is an individual who would assume the risk of successfully or unsuccessfully organizing resources to start new businesses and enter competitive markets. So again, an entrepreneur is someone who has an idea, they want to create something, they want to sell it, and then they want to sell a lot of it and make money. The second question, the colonists were able to keep the profit they realized through establishing new businesses and entering markets. The question would be, did this profit create more desire among the colonists to want to trade? Explain. So at this point, go ahead and pause the video and answer questions 1 and 2 on your paper. Okay, hopefully you answered questions 1 and 2 on your paper and you did it well. You went back to look if you needed to. The American economy was largely built on the backs of entrepreneurs. And again, as we said the last time, these were individuals who took risks, okay? And again, they wanted to enter new markets. They were looking to sell their goods not only locally, but globally as well. Private ownership of land. Private ownership of land, an incentive to becoming economically productive. So in other words, there's a lot of sense when you own something, you're going to take care of it because it's yours. If you lend out goods to a friend or things that you own, you'd be upset if they gave it back to you and it was broken. However, when it's yours, and remember this, and it's not only yours, but you paid for it, you're going to take better care of it. All right, look at question 3. Consider the impact on colonial production if England had taken full command over production in the colonies and seized all profits and incomes made by the colonists. So again, go ahead and stop the video and answer question 3. What, who, and how much to produce? You now have your own land and can make money off of it. This lifestyle was not possible in Europe for most people. Again, this was a major reason why people came to the colonies. However, the colonists had to weigh the consequences of hiring more workers, investing in research and development for their products, and lowering or raising prices against potential profits in the short and long term. So what you had to do is you had to think about, do you hire more workers? Do you invest in research to build a better product? Do you lower your price because nobody's buying your good? Do you raise your price because everybody wants it? These are economic questions that business owners have to consider. This means the colonists had to see what the market was for their goods and if they could sell it locally and globally. They also had to look to the future to see if they could even have a business down the road. So again, it's tough to own a business. You have to consider all of these economic questions. The U.S. economy is part of a global economy, and that's nowadays as well. Just a quick review. Imports, those are goods made in other countries and brought into the United States. When we look back in time, it was not the United States. The colonies weren't united. They were loyal to England in the sense that England provided military protection and law. But again, the colonies were very much in it for themselves. Okay, exports, goods made in the U.S. and sold around the world. These are things that are shipped out. And in the case of the colonists, these would be goods that were shipped out of the colonies. Okay, go ahead and look at number 4 on the worksheet and think about some items around you currently in 2013, the current day. Where are they from? We're also going to go to number 5. We're going to look at the slide and come back, but what information can we gather from this chart? And that's visual 4.2. So when we're done with this next visual, pause it, go back and answer question number 5. Again, the percentage distribution of total colonial trade. So if we look at the chart here, we see the United Kingdom, of which England is a major part, the West Indies, Southern Europe, Africa. Again, we could see that colonial imports of goods and services. Again, the vast amount of imports are coming from the United Kingdom. Nothing's coming from Africa. When we look at the percentage of colonial exports of goods and services, things that were being sent out, 56%, more than half, were being sent to England. There was a huge trade partnership here. Specialization. At this point, remember, pause it, go back and answer question 5. Specialization. People choose not to be self-sufficient in producing all goods and services. People and nations trade for what they do not produce. So again, you can't just have one store for everything. People want to be self-sufficient in a limited number of things. Interdependence. Countries that rely on each other for goods and services. This is what makes trade happen. Countries don't produce everything, but what they do produce, and what they produce well, they trade with other nations. Nations all need each other to trade and prosper economically. Okay, questions 6, 7, and 8. What pattern do you see in the value of goods and services produced by the American colonists for use in England? Question 7. What pattern do you see in the value of goods and services produced by England for the use in the colonies? Question 8. Could both groups produce goods and services for other nations? So let me go ahead to visual 4.3. Again, this shows us the value of trade between the colonies and England in the years 1700 to 1770. So again, you could see the value of exports from the colonies to England in 1700 was about 395,000 or so, and that little symbol in front of it means pounds. You could see that by the time we get to 1770, we're up over 1 million. And again, you could see that from those years, many exports are growing. If you look at the value of imports from England, it's pretty much the same principle. You start in 1700 with 344,000. You end up with pushing almost 2 million in 1770. Now there might be a difference from year to year, but overall, measuring from 1700 to 1770, you could see a big difference. So go ahead and hit those questions 6, 7, and 8 on your worksheet. And pause the video now. All right, questions 9 and 10. How might an increase in the number of people living in an economy affect the supply of labor? Question 10. How may an increase in the number of people living in an economy affect consumer demand for domestic and imported goods and services? So we want to look at visual 4.4 to be able to come up with these questions. So again, if you look at the population in colonial America, you could see that in 1700, you had roughly 250,000. You jump clear down to 1770, you have about 2,150,000 roughly. So again, the population grew from 1700 to 1770. So again, at this point, you want to go back. You want to answer questions 9 and 10 and pause the video. If you need to go back and look at the previous slide, that would be fine. Okay, just a summary of main ideas from this PowerPoint. Clearly defined property rights provided colonists with incentives to be productive, to specialize, and to trade. So the fact that the colonists had legal property rights in the colonies, they had their own land, that was an incentive to be productive. Who wants to just sit in the middle of their farm and just stare at the clouds? They want to make money. There was opportunity to specialize. That means you could focus on a particular crop. If you were in the South, you grew tobacco, you grew rice, because you had the resources that enabled you to do that. And finally, to trade. There were trade opportunities. Okay, number 2. Many colonists sought to market. That means to sell their goods domestically. That would mean within the colonies and globally at competitive prices. Number 3. The colonists used their profits to invest or purchase other products that they couldn't produce easily or at a low cost themselves. So again, when colonists made money, they thus threw that back into other products or invested in research to make their product better. Sometimes if it costs too much to make a product, it's easier to buy that elsewhere. Number 4, economic choices made in the past have affected history. Some points to consider. Would the King of England have authorized the exploring of new lands if money couldn't have been made? Doubtful that the king would have authorized that. The king wasn't dumb. He knew that there were economic prospects to send colonists to the New World. Even if you send and authorize colonies for religious reasons, you know that those people aren't going to just sit. They're going to be productive. That's good for the colonists. That's good for England. Another point, importing slaves to the Americas was the solution to a lack of a steady labor source. There weren't enough workers to keep up with the demand for goods. So that opened up a can of worms. You have all this prosperity. There's more desire, demand for products. Again, you don't have the labor. That's where slavery kicked in to make up that labor source. Unlike previous years, namely last year, you'll find that the labor source for slavery was all race-based. Slaves came from Africa to the West Indies, which will get funneled up to the colonies for labor. And as we look back in history, that's a source of contention because slavery wasn't just a mixture of many groups, many nationalities, but in this case, in American history, it was all race-based. And then finally, the main point, the colonial economy grew and the standard of living improved. Again, that's why people continue to come to the New World, not only for religious freedom, but for economic freedom as well. And it was a win-win situation. Again, do you remember these economic vocabulary terms? You might want to go back through the video if you're not sure, but these were some things that I threw out at you. Okay, thanks for listening, and again, complete the sheet if you need to, and feel free to review it if needed.